Hello and good evening and welcome to this evening's Planning Subcommittee meeting. I'm Councillor Sarah Williams from West Green Ward and the Vice Chair of the committee is
Councillor Peacock from Northumberland Park Ward.
Thank you.
Councillor Luke Hawley-Harrison, Crouch End.
Councillor Viv Ross, Fortis Green.
Councillor Yvonne Say, Bounds Green.
Councillor Amina Ibrahim, Noel Park, and I'd just like to give my apologies that I'll be leaving the meeting early.
Thank you.
Councillor Liz Morris, Highgate Ward.
Councillor Peter Mitchell, Woodside Ward.
Speak. Does it work? Yeah. Councillor Dhiren Basu, Seven Sisters Ward.
Go again, Councillor Rice.
Reg Rice, Tottenham Hill.
And officers we have present are
Rob Szosowski, Assistant Director for Planning, Building Standards and Sustainability.
Justin Farley, Legal Officer.
Robin McKnocker, Head of Development Management.
Chris Smith, Principal Planning Officer.
Fiona Ray, Clerk to the Committee.
Richard Truscott, Design Officer.
We've also got new mics this evening, so forgive us just getting used to them. There are other officers will be attending virtually and they'll introduce themselves when it's relevant. This meeting is being recorded. All registered speakers should be aware that they will be recorded for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site or by anyone attending this meeting. The planning protocol states that members and speakers are requested to note the information set out at item 2 on the agenda. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Gina Adamu, and as you just heard, we have apologies for leaving early from Councillor Ibrahim. There are no items of urgent business. Do members have any declarations of interest? None. So at item 6, we have the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of October 2021. Are those minutes approved? Councillor Mitchell.
Well, I was just going to point out in item 8 that it was about Brunel Walk, not Brunei Walk.
Oh, very well spotted. Can that be changed? Thanks. So we'll move on to the first substantive item, which is item 8, HGY 2021-2160, 19 Bernard Road, and that's pages 5 to 120 in your packs. We have Christopher Smith will be the planning officer who will present. We have the applicants here who can introduce themselves when they're speaking. And I think we're down as having 2 objectors. Can I just confirm you're here? Is that Jack Grant and Simon Finn? Are either of those people present? Hi, hiya, thanks. So you're Simon Finn, yep, thanks. So over to the planning officer to introduce the report.
Yes, thanks. I'm just trying to get the presentation on the screen. 1 minute.
We're just resolving some technical difficulties. Be about 1 minute. Apologies.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks everybody for being patient. So this scheme is 19 Bernard Road. So planning permission is being sought for the demolition of the existing buildings and construction of a mixed-use development providing 9 residential units, 3,495 square metres of commercial space and a gallery cafe, together with associated landscaping, refuse storage and cycle parking. So the development would include demolition of the existing commercial units, provision of employment space as mentioned, bespoke studios for creative businesses plus a cafe and gallery space, a minimum 10% affordable workspace, 9 residential units, which includes 2 3-bedroom units and 1 wheelchair user dwelling, and all units are dual aspect. So the site location. The site, as you can see on this plan, is predominantly a industrial area. There's industrial buildings to the north and south and residential to the east. So the site is designated as an employment regeneration area. It's in the Tottenham growth area, the Upper Lee Valley opportunity area and a creative enterprise zone. The site is also within the site allocation TH12 in the Tottenham AAP. It's the southern buildings you can see on the map within the red line area there. The site to the north is the Bernard Works scheme that was approved in 2018 and has covered most of the site allocation objectives. But this scheme would accord with some of those objectives as well, which includes employment-led mixed-use development and to maximise the quantum of employment space on the site. So just to give you an idea of the Bernard Works scheme, which is opposite the site, the site in question for this development is immediately to the south of this green area here. So you can't see my cursor on the screen, but on the left image, it's just to the south of that image there, and on the image on the right, it is just to the left of the blue block. And this site as well was previously received planning permission at the end of last year for a purely residential development of a very similar size and scale and height to that currently proposed. But a employment-led scheme is more in line with the policy objectives for the site. So the existing site is currently a sort of industrial unit, single story. It is sort of degrading slightly and has fire damage as well. So into the ground floor layout, you can see here the residential access in the orange on the left-hand side of the picture is on Ashby Road, and the most of the commercial accesses, in fact, most of them, not all of them, on the northern side onto Bernard Road, and there's a cafe gallery unit on that corner which has access from both streets. So moving on to the first floor, the residential layout is shown on the left-hand side. All of those units have dual aspect as previously noted. There's also communal amenity space at that first floor for the residential units. The commercial floor plate is quite a large floor plate that will be subdivided into smaller units, and you'll get an indicative layout of that shortly. So just moving up to the second floor, the residential layout is very similar, but a key part of the scheme is a sort of communal terrace on the southern side of the commercial elements, which would form a sort of key part of the scheme to allow collaboration to take place at that level. So here, this slide shows the indicative commercial layout. So the sort of uses we expect on the site would be shown on these plans. You've got that ground floor is the image at the top, and it shows sort of photographers all working together in a sort of collaborative approach. on the left-hand side of the image in the red colouring. And in the orange colouring, that's identified as a sort of maker space with lots of smaller subdivided units that would for sort of grafter commercial uses for furniture makers and that sort of activity. So moving on to the first floor, the indicative layout currently shows sort of fashion creative users on the first floor there, and artists in purple. Sorry, the fashion is in blue. So it sort of gives you a real idea of the sort of approach we're looking for at this site. Lots of different creative activities, smaller scale units all working together, and all the sort of positive aspects that brings. So a few views in the next images. This view is from the north on Ashby Road. You can see Bernard Road just to the right of the image there, and the buildings will be finished in high quality brick materials, and the coloured elements are glazed tiles. And from the south on Ashby Road as well, so you can see how the building would appear from the sort of the residential part of the surrounding area. And that's where the main residential entrance would be. And the view from Bernard Road as well. So the scheme is 5 stories in height, which, as previously mentioned, is a similar height and scale to the previously approved scheme on the site. It's a high quality contemporary development. The Qrp recommendations, the recommendations of the quality review panel have been taken into account when designing the final iteration of this development, and the panel and the council's design officer support the scheme. And these are just a few images to give you an idea of the sort of emerging district in this area. Shows the Bernard Works scheme coming forward, that is expected to come forward soon, on how it would appear from Ashby Road on the left, and from the green space on just to the north of Bernard Road on the right. So the principle of the development, it is an employment-led mixed-use development that is in accordance with the site location TH12. As previously mentioned, it is in accordance with the site's employment policy designation. There would be a mutually beneficial cluster of creative businesses created on the site. There's a high demand for creative space in this neighbourhood, which is designated by the Mayor of London as a creative enterprise zone. As mentioned, 10% of the provision of affordable 10% of the workspace on the site would be affordable workspace, retained in perpetuity, and 9 residential units also proposed. In terms of neighbouring amenity, there'll be no loss of daylight or sunlight. Neighbouring outlook and privacy is not significantly affected, and that goes for the emerging Bernard Works scheme as well. And the commercial operations would be controlled and managed through the Section 106 illegal agreement. In terms of parking, it's a car-free development. There's a really good public transport connectivity in the area. There is residential and commercial wheelchair user parking provided, and high quality dedicated cycle parking provided within the ground floor. There's also a commercial loading bay on Bernard Road. So the recommendation is that the development is considered acceptable and is in accordance with policy. So officers recommend the committee resolves to grant planning permission subject to conditions under Section 106 agreement as set out in the committee reports. Thank you.
Thank you. Do the members of the committee have any comments or questions for the planning officer, please? Councillor Mitchell.
Well, do you want to take questions now, Chair, or after we've heard other contributions?
Questions for the planning officer now.
Yeah, okay. So on the car-free development, on page 9, it says that residents would not be allowed visitor parking permits, whereas on page 41, it says that, on page 41, it says that they couldn't apply for resident or business parking permits, but it doesn't mention visitor permits. And I thought normally that even when a development is classified as car-free, that we did allow visitor permits for the residential part. Can I also ask about the carbon offset? On page 10, it says that there is a deferred carbon offset contribution payable if the development fails to connect to a district energy network. So does that mean only if there were to be a district energy network and they refused to sign up to it? Is that what we're talking about for implementing that particular phrase? I also wanted to ask about the statements about what would happen if some of the commercial space were later converted into residential. So on page 11, it says that if that were to happen, then there would need to be a financial contribution towards off-site provision of affordable housing. But then on page 27, paragraph 636, it says that if some of the commercial were to be converted to residential in future, then a proportion of affordable housing would be provided, which seems to suggest that some of that new residential would have to be affordable. So could you clarify whether it's that or whether we would be seeking a financial contribution? Just some points on the sort of design and layout. On page 30, it refers to green roofs, and I wasn't clear whether that was both for the residential block and or the commercial block. It wasn't clear from the drawings that we had. It seemed to me rather a lot was going on the roof, because it talks about green roofs in paragraph 6.4.23. Page 36, it talks about PV panels on the roof. And then on page 38, it says that as far as the residential block's concerned, there is a community amenity space on the first floor, which I can see from the drawings, but also on the roof level, which I wasn't clear about, whether there was an amenity space on the roof. And on page 45, it refers to green walls of climbing plants, and I couldn't see from the drawings where those were going to be. And then final point is about heat pumps. So on page 35, in response to the QRP, it states that there would be heat pumps. But then on page 56, when we're looking at the conditions on what we will be asked to vote on later, condition 25 says, prior to installation, there would have to be details of the gas boilers to be provided. But, and paragraph 28 as it is in the original document and not the addendum, it talks about if heat pumps are provided. So could you clarify whether we're insisting on heat pumps or what the situation is? Thanks, I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Councillor Mitchell. I think we've got Maurice Richards online who could answer the parking question.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon.
Thanks.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. Maurice Richards, Transport Planning Team Leader. Yes, Councillor, I think there's a mistake there. Residents are allowed visitors permit, so that's guaranteed. But the business and residents will not be allowed to apply for
For my benefit, would you mind repeating that, because you cut out slightly during it?
Sure, hopefully you can hear me clearly. So residents will be allowed to apply for visitors permit. So all car-free developments are allowed to apply for visitors permit. So if you have someone visiting, whether it be a delivery van, whether it be a care service, you will be allowed visitors permit. What you're not allowed to apply for is a car parking permit, which gives you the ability to park 24/7 on the highway. And that would apply for both the business and the residents of the development.
Thank you. And Mr. McKnocker wants to come in on the next one.
Yes, I'll just quickly take the question on the district energy network and the delayed offset. The approach there is that we set the offset level based on the emissions from the future district energy network, and then the deferred payment is in the case that they don't connect for whatever reasons, if legally it can't be done, or the district energy network doesn't happen, and then what they should have paid based on their actual emissions is then made up through a payment.
Could I ask the supplementary to that then? What if they go for air source heat pumps instead?
So air source heat pumps can still connect to that. That will still allow for a hot water system. So that is still an option. So it could be air source heat pump, which then switches over to district energy network. In the past, we'd have done it as gas boilers and then connected through.
Yes, I'll just touch on the point about boilers as well. Yeah, I think the energy report isn't confirmed at the moment, and that's still to be finalised via condition. So the way we've laid out the conditions here is that there's a boiler condition there that they have to give us details of the boilers if they can't provide air source heat pumps. But at the moment they're looking into the provision of air source heat pumps, which will hopefully come in as part of the revised energy and sustainability statement by condition. And I think the condition for the boilers is laid out, is written so that if they do provide air source heat pumps, then they won't need boilers and they won't need to comply, not comply, but there won't be a need to provide any details as part of that condition. I know there's a few other questions as well that I guess I'll dig into. On the green roofs issue, my understanding, I don't have a plan in front of me right now, but from memory, I think all of the roofs have got some element of green roof on there, whether they include PVs or not. But that strategy will also be secured by conditions, so we will look at that again when that condition comes in. In terms of the green walls, there are some climbers provided in the communal first floor amenity space. It may not be that clear on some of the plans, but there's a landscaping design and access statement, a landscaping statement that includes some imagery about planters. It's not a traditional green wall in that it's infrastructure that forms part of the building, but there will be climbers there. That's what it refers to. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else I need to add. Sorry, just to confirm, there is a communal amenity space at on the roof of the residential block as well.
So it's on the residential, not the commercial part. Okay. Is that, you would like to come back, Councillor Mitchell?
So the one outstanding question, I think, is what would happen if some of the commercial units were subsequently changed to residential? Would we seek a financial contribution, or would we seek that some of those new residential units should be affordable? Because both statements are in this report.
Yes, I think the emphasis in this situation is to seek a financial contribution in the first instance. Sorry that we needed to clarify that.
So I've got Councillor Rice next, please.
Yeah, thanks to you very much. I was wondering why a small business was not allowed to park at least one vehicle in the vicinity. I mean, I take it we're aiming at people who are running small businesses and probably craft industries and so on. And they might have lightweight equipment, length of wood and so on to take to their place of business. But they're not allowed to do that according to these regs. Why not? I can't see what harm they will cause if a small business were allowed just one business permit. And why no affordable housing and housing, the affordable being provided off-site? It's about time we begin to create affordable housing of the sort of figures that we talked of in theory, 40% on developments. Most developments that we go through have very little affordable. I think there needs to be a relook at our approach in terms of how affordable is delivered.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. We'll ask Mr. Richards to come in on the parking issue to start off with, please, if you're still there.
Sure, Chair. If you can hear me, hopefully you can hear me clearly. So, Councillor, it's the council's position now that development coming forward to meet our growth aspirations need to be car-free. I think it's up to the committee if they believe they want to make an exemption for one car parking space for the commercial element of development. But you will be setting the precedent for future development proposal to provide business car parking space on street. And also, council, you have to say then, how do we manage that in terms of the numbers? Is it only one for that unit? And what about the other business within there? So what we'll provide on street are loading bays, so the business can be serviced in terms of refuse collection or any deliveries they want. But again, Chair, as we move forward with more developments within the Tottenham and Wood Green area, I think most of the projects you see coming forward are car-free developments.
Thanks. And Mr. McNucker.
Yes, just to be clear, in this instance, there's only 9 residential units, so that is below the threshold for affordable housing on this proposal. As Councillor Mitchell mentioned, the head of term number 9 on page 11 includes a safeguard should the commercial space be converted to residential, because that obviously would take it beyond that threshold to 10 units, and it should then be looking at on-site affordable housing. I think in those circumstances we foresee that it would be difficult to then retrospectively put that on site. So we've said a financial contribution, but there could be moments in the development if that did happen that we could ask for on site. So we could make that more explicit in that head of term if members were concerned by that should the development not be occupied, you could put in on-site affordable. But I think once it's occupied and has been used as a commercial use and then was converted to a residential, it'd be very difficult to find anyone who'd want to take affordable on-site there. So we would naturally have to look at a financial contribution.
Thanks. Councillor Corley-Harrison.
Well, my questions really are a follow-up on that, and well, both that and the affordable. The commercial spaces, will they not be Class E, and therefore the permitted development rights would allow change of use? And in that case, what legal power can be invoked on a planning application for in perpetuity for an allocation towards affordable housing? For example, if a commercial site sold its lease on 3 times over the next 30 years, at what point does it end? And just on the affordable, on the previous application that was granted, there was 35% on-site affordable. That was fully residential, I think, that application from memory. And it seems like this is part of this is getting 10% affordable commercial. So quite, in my mind, quite a drop off in terms of the proportion of the site that is becoming affordable in virtue of the fact that it's having commercial space. Was that the original intention of TH12? And if it was, what proportion of TH12 was planned to be commercial versus residential, given that the Bernard Works is already split? I mean, is there a need for more commercial space on this site, more residential space on this site, both? And that's not necessarily what we're deciding today. We're deciding on this application, but is there demand specifically on this site for commercial or residential or both?
Yes, just on your question on permitted development, the applicant would be entering a legal agreement that would travel with the land. So this would apply to permitted development changes, and that would be written into the section 106. And just to pick up those other questions, there is both a need for residential and commercial, and there's often a tension in planning on delivering both. We've seen one scheme that leaned more towards residential, and this one leans more towards commercial. Commercial is a less viable use, so it's financially harder to then provide an element of that below market. So that's why you're seeing a lower level of affordable in this case. But the site allocation sets some indicative figures for development, and the Bernard Work scheme had largely delivered most of those. So it gives us that freedom in the remaining section to apportion that differently. And this scheme, as we said, is meeting the demand for commercial.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Say now, please.
Yeah, on page 10, number 8, I'd like to have a number added for the provision of work placements for unemployed or economically inactive, and for the STEM workshops as well. I'd like a specific number if that's possible. I was going to say something about what Luke mentioned as well, but I think you've answered that. And one other comment is that climbers don't grow very well in pots, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think on the STEM workshops that we could certainly include a number there with agreement from the applicant. The apprentices, I think, which is the 5th bullet point, that's calculated per 3 million development cost at a maximum of 10% of the construction workforce. So that is what's in our planning guidance. So we don't have that number to hand because we don't have the total development costs yet, but that is in line with our guidance. So it isn't practice to include a number on that.
I just don't want them to wriggle out of their obligations.
Can councillors be assured that there's no wriggling out of obligations?
Yes, I think the putting in a number wouldn't strengthen that any. They are bound by the terms that they're agreeing to based on that figure.
I have Councillor Morris next, please.
Thank you. In the presentation, you said that there would be no loss of daylight and sunlight. On page 39 of the report, 6.7.4, the report says that the impact of the development on daylight and sunlight of the properties on Ashby Road, numbers 13 to 22, was found not to be significant. So there will be a loss of some daylight and sunlight. Is that correct? And how much will that be?
Well, I don't have the specific figures to hand. I mean, if there is any loss of day or sunlight there, it will be significantly below the BRE's standards, so that there'd still be ample daylight and sunlight to habitable rooms for there not to be any detrimental loss of amenity to those properties.
Thanks. And I also have Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit I found it strange that giving 10% affordable for businesses, but not for the housing, but I think that's been covered by the previous comments. But my question is, on page 23, 6130, it talks about current occupiers being allowed to come back to the new building. And I just wondered how that would work, because I mean, I presume it's going to take a year or so if we grant planning. It's going to take a year or so to build, and small businesses will disappear into the ether, go somewhere else. So how does that work? Maybe that's one for the
I think there's one probably for the applicant.
Yeah. My other question was on page 42, talking about cycle parking. Perhaps if someone can, on 6812, dedicated cycle stores and short stay cycle parking. I've asked this question before about dedicated parking areas for cyclists and how they actually are underused. And I know there is a report coming to strategic planning about this.
What's the actual question though, Councillor Ross?
Question was, I just wanted an explanation about how that would work. I didn't pick up how it would work. Thank you.
I think if I could bring in Mr. Richards on the cycle parking question, if that's suitable.
Yeah, sure, Chair. So cycle parking is provided in line with the London Plan standards, and this development proposal complies with that. So we have long stay cycle parking for both the residential and the commercial element. The short stay would seek to provide as part of the public realm, and it's accessible to people visiting the development. In terms of the underutilization of cycle parking, I think we are providing for future growth, and therefore the London Plan reflects this. I think there has been a surge in cycling since the pandemic, and we believe there will be more and more demand going forward in the future as we seek to provide the necessary infrastructure to facilitate the growth. So I think, Councillor, I think definitely we will seek to secure as much cycle parking as we can in line with the policy, both short term and long term.
Thank you. So on the tenants returning, would you like to comment on that? Or would you mind introducing yourself before you speak?
Sure. My name is Melina. I have worked as the agent on this planning permission. I'm a creative, but I'm also a creative workspace provider and actually manage all the workspace at 19 Bernard Road and on Bernard Works. The comment included in Chris's notes is because we would like to try to relocate the existing tenants back into the site once it's been. That's why there's a reference to the ground floor units being grafters units, because it's currently mainly grafters that's in there. We have approached Haringey already to try to find a temporary site where we can set up locally for them to be moved to while the development is taking place, for them to move back in on the ground floor and be able to sign early on a lease to secure they're going back in and actually be able to build their space early on while the development is taking form as well. I don't know if that answers it enough, but I can go more into it later on as well when we present.
Thank you. Councillor Ross.
Can I just ask, as I said, if we grant planning permission, when do you think it will be built? How long will it take?
So, I think we've done a plan for it already, and until it starts being built, the freeholder has spoken to the bank already, and all the finances are sorted. Obviously, it's a slightly difficult market at the moment, but they are intending on building it as soon as they can. The whole process, I think we're looking at, it's probably around a year and a half. We are looking at potentially seeing whether we can stage it to some degree, so some of the commercial floors potentially can go in earlier while the rest of the development is still being completed.
Thanks. And one more from Councillor Corley-Harrison.
Thanks. Yeah, back to affordable bit. I suppose we don't have them come up too often, so it just feels a bit loose. So I'm wondering if we were to have a resi application come forward, there'd be a minimum percentage for a viability assessment to be provided with the application. Does that not happen with a commercial application with affordable units? And then when it refers to 10%, is that 10% of the units, 10% of the square footage of commercial space, 10% of what? And 10% of what going forwards? So if some of the commercial space was converted to residential, even if they paid their contribution, does it continue to be 10% of whatever your answer is previously, 10% forever ongoing until you have one unit left and 10% of that one unit has to be affordable? Or is it 10% of the starting block and they can sell the first affordable commercial unit off and that's then gone to housing or whatever it becomes? And how's that 10% then protected if those commercial ones are sold off? So what are the terms on all of this, I suppose? Because there's not a lot, well, maybe just on the page I'm reading, there's not a huge amount of detail.
Okay, I think Mr. McNuck is going to come in on this one.
Yes, I'll bring in Chris in a second, just on the viability position. But yes, I think you've taken that further than we really expected to go in reality. That the residential affordable housing safeguard is for a circumstance that we don't foresee happening, and is hopefully to prevent that happening, and any sort of gamesmanship. I think we've got a good relationship with the applicant, but sites change hands, and you just can't foresee what's going to happen. So there could be some tension between those, but and in a way potentially the 10% commercial obligation perhaps prevents this happening. But it's really that given that there's been a residential development here before, to prevent a wholesale change of that as a way of getting a planning permission by avoiding affordable housing.
Yeah, I'll just come in on the viability. I mean, the offer at the moment is 10%, which is done on a floor space basis. Given that the way the commercial space is laid out, it's to be subdivided. We've seen indicative ways that can happen, but the idea is for that to be sort of clarified further down the line exactly what the layout will be. So that's why we sort of put a floor space figure in at the moment. On the viability side of things, it's we do think it's a good offer. There is currently some negotiations ongoing about the exact level of affordable, but we don't believe it will drop below 10%. So that is still a little bit TBC exactly what the final amount will be, but the 10% is a minimum that we would secure.
Okay, thanks. And if there are no further comments or questions, I think I can go over to our objectors. So should we start with Mr. Finn? Mr. Finn, I don't know if you know the format, but you get 3 minutes to speak. And
I'll do my best.
You will hear a bell at the end of 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll do my best. I think there's only me here actually, and so I
see Mr. Grant sitting there as well.
Well, I'll get him. First of all, lots of things that I've picked up on are things that the councillors have also picked up on. I do believe the councillor's last point is actually very valid. One of the reasons this came to my attention was because when I looked at it, I'd never seen it before. I hadn't seen the previous applications or the one for Bernard Works, but the thing that immediately struck me was that it seemed to be, given the previous application, a way of getting out of delivering affordable housing. And basically the commercial side of it looked to me very much like a shell building that was going to be converted to residential at a later date. Now I'm only a layperson, so if I picked up on that, then it must have been fairly obvious. I did speak to the planning officer. There was a lot of debate about the consultation process, which did not happen. There was no consultation process for this. There was one public meeting which only was open for 4 hours, which occurred once. Nobody got any letters. The council refused to extend the consultation zone beyond 100 metres, which only included commercial spaces. This area, Rangemore Road, backs up onto mostly residential areas. None of us were asked. This obviously, as you know, the commercial to residential policy plan will roll out in that area, and these buildings will set a precedent for what we get. In that policy document, it says nothing about increasing the bulk and size and mass and height of buildings. It simply says commercial to residential. I don't see why there should be a carte blanche then to go up to 9 floors, 7 floors, 5 floors. Very quickly, because I'm conscious of time, I've got a few things. The green roofs I picked up on, which of course I welcome. What I would like to see is the council make a stipulation about maintenance and upkeep, because we've all seen green roofs approved, but what we see is we see them, you know, in disrepair, we see them not growing. I'd like them to be a stipulation that as part of the building conditions and the management of it, that the green roofs are sustained and maintained. Also, we live within a flood plain, which does have a flood disaster plan. So in terms of rainwater collection and rainwater drainage, that adequate provision should be made for that. And obviously that could be done in line with the green roofs. A couple of things to do with the treatment that's going to be used of the building. I do like the design. I can't say that I don't. I'm conscious that it looks very much like two buildings rather than one, which again struck me. It says of a high quality, what materials? We're not told, we're just told the colour of brick, and we're told, you know, that it will be high quality. I'd like to know a name and a type. Also, additionally, the windows look very nice. It makes no mention of them being double or triple glazed, which I find very strange in 2021, that there's no commitment there to, you know, reducing carbon, you know, offsetting and things like that, and also making the buildings, giving them a longevity, you know, of life towards, you know, being there in 15 years and still looking pretty, but also not polluting and having, you know, the heat exchanger thing. I picked up on that as well, the boilers, and one saying one and one saying another. Also,
that was your bell. I was letting you finish.
Oh, no. Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
You know, we're not against development. What we want is quality development that will still be there, that provides homes and businesses for people who want to live in South Tottenham.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. I think we'll go straight to Mr. Grant, and then we'll have questions or comments. Thank you. If you could switch your microphone off, or it will feed back, I think. Oh, sorry. Thank you. So same format, Mr. Grant, so 3 minutes. Thanks.
So a lot of my points are the same points. You know, this site has already had planning approved, and for 45 residential units, and it will go down to 9. There were 14 affordable units. The planning committee is tied to grant presumption in favour of sustainable development by the NPPF, and one of the reasons it has to do that is because housing targets haven't been met, and one of the reasons that happens is because developers not developing sites that you've approved. That's where that delay is coming in from, and you're effectively moving 36 units away from that target by approving this development, and sort of taking away your own agency as a committee. And I very much echo the other person's view that it's a way of getting around the restrictions that you put on these sort of developments. The only other thing that I would say is that if you are doing it, don't do it on floor space, do it on cost per floor space, because that would mean that the affordable units would get the worst areas of floor space in this unit, the one that's furthest away from the lifts and furthest away from the ground floor, that would be of less economic value. And the only other thing is that I understand it must have been frustrating to have things come back to you, but I think that having clearly a lot of a community here, allowing 9 minutes for them to speak on a matter that's taken months and months is something that is reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any questions for the objectors or comments? Yes, Councillor Mitchell.
Well, could I just ask a question about the consultation process, because it was said that no letters had gone out and there hadn't been adequate consultation. So the committee papers say that 531 neighbouring properties were consulted. So my question is, how were they consulted? Does it mean that that many properties received a letter? Could we just have some clarification? And then the other point, just wanted to clarify, was about flood risk. Again, on page 44 of the papers, it says a low probability of flooding, which is not what we've just been told. So could we just be clear on that? Thanks.
So in terms of consultation, it is on the web page for this application, and there's a consultation list which shows that over 500 people were sent letters about this application. There were also site notices posted in the local area and a notice went in the local press as well, which is in accordance with our statutory requirements. There was also a sort of public meeting that the developer did off their own back. They didn't have to do that, and they did have a meeting in the local area that I've seen photos of and had some feedback from. So we've gone above and beyond the statutory requirements in terms of consultation. In terms of flood risk, I mean there's no such thing as zero flood risk. Low risk is the best quality location in terms of flood risk, and the Environment Agency have no objections to this development. So we're happy to proceed in that respect.
And just on the question on whether there's double glazing or not, I suppose the technical term that will have been used in the report is thermal efficiency. So that's about insulation and all of that. So that has been assessed and is in the report under carbon reduction.
Thanks. If there's no other questions, I think we, Councillor Ross.
I've got two actually. One is for, I think, is it Mr. Rice? I didn't quite catch his last point about the number of minutes. I wonder if he could repeat it.
I think that was Mr. Grant, actually.
Sorry, Mr. Grant, yeah. Apologise.
Sorry, it was just about the next application. There's 3 people who wanted to speak, but there's only 2 people who's been allowed.
My other question was, I thought we'd stopped, as a council, stopped sending out letters for planning applications, but we're told that 500 went out.
Yeah, we do still send letters. Our statement of community involvement doesn't oblige us to, but that continues to be the practice, yeah.
Okay, if there aren't any further questions to the objectors, I'll ask the applicants, as according to our protocol, because we've had 6 minutes worth of objections. You have 6 minutes. You don't have to use them all up if you don't wish to. Thanks.
Thank you. I think some of it we've covered already. Obviously, as you're all aware, there's a planning application already consented for the site, which is a residential-led planning. The freeholders are not property developers. They're not looking to sell off the residential elements. To be honest, they hardly got any residential elements and mainly specialise in commercial space and is looking for the long-term investment. The previous scheme only got 3 commercial units, which is not really suitable or viable for them long-term to keep, along with all the residential. And to be honest, they're not looking to build the consented scheme, hence why I went in and worked with them to develop a commercial creative-led scheme for workspace, long-term investment. So they're not looking for returns the same way as obviously a normal developer, which I think is the main point to really, look at. And there's not a lot of these schemes happening in Haringey or beyond, because obviously most developer would want the return from selling off the flats. The flats in this development, they're looking to actually retain and not even sell off. But from a viability point of view, we still have to look at them, consider them as if they were being sold off. On the affordable workspace, I mean, we're a creative workspace provider, already manage. We've got nearly 200 local studios, a majority of them in South Tottenham. There's a huge demand for creative workspaces, and we haven't got space enough, and we can't find space enough. And I think that's a major positive thing about this scheme, is that it's developing an awful lot of commercial affordable, but also creative workspace. Which is really required within the borough, and also more so within South Tottenham, because it's the creative enterprise zone, and there's certain square footage of creative workspace that has to be delivered. We've done some indicative drawings only, purely because not all of it has been confirmed, exactly the layouts. The indicative drawings are purely based on our existing tenants across all the sites. And show approximately 66 workspaces. All of them got natural light, high floor to ceiling heights, which is why we reduced the amount of actually stories. We've gone down, but then we've increased every single floor to add the extra floor to ceiling heights, because that's something all of our tenants prefer over low floor to ceiling heights. Is anything else? I think a few on the commons potentially. Before, obviously the main point is the 36 units of residential that's being lost. I presume most likely would never have been built anyway, because the owners and freeholders would not actually want to build it. And then I want to point out, I think early on there was a comment saying it was only a single-story building, and I know there's been some comments in the objections as well, but there's a single-story building towards the back, but there's actually a two-story building at the back of the site. And the main thing we're trying to create here is to creative workspaces that will encourage collaboration among the businesses that's occupying the spaces. Similar to what's happening today behind the brick walls, but also this will allow, with the windows, to actually allow the public and the local community to actually see what's going on behind the walls, which I think is kind of missing throughout London at the moment. You've got all this creativity and amazing work happening around the corner, but no one really knows it's actually happening next door to you. And hopefully they'll help create a better connection with the local community. Always ensure there is a future local and creative businesses in South Tottenham, because a lot of them are being lost due to developments in the area. And then also we're hoping by creating creative workspaces that will hopefully help inspire the local community and future generations to start aspiring to become a maker and a creator, because a lot of these trades are kind of being lost today. I don't know if you've got any further questions or anything I haven't answered.
Thank you. There's a Councillor Corley Harrison to start with.
Thanks. I guess I'll ask the obvious one, which is why bring forward an application to build residential premises when there was no intention to fulfil it? Why didn't this application come forward in the first instance? And then on the affordable, it'd be good to understand from you as applicants how you imagine the 10% affordable working and how you plan to allocate that throughout the site. And then in the pack, it references the fact that an affordable workspace provider would be employed, or maybe that's yourselves, to operate. It wasn't clear to me whether that was to operate the 10% separate from the other 90%, or to operate the whole site just generally as the site commercial managing agent. So if you could just confirm that.
I'll start at the last point. So we've drafted up paperwork. So the plan is for all the ground floor is going to be let directly by the freeholder to the end user, and all the upper floors is going to go to a workspace provider that will be managing and letting it. So they're going to be renting it out as a square footage and then be subletting it back out to the end user. They're also going to be getting the site on a shell and core, and then going to be doing the whole fit out and interior, hence why we've only provided the indicative drawings for now. With regard to the affordable, rather than having one corner that's just the affordable and they're kind of sidelined a bit in the corner, and obviously the more cheaper places, we're looking, it's going to be exactly the same finish, but they're going to be allocated throughout the other tenants, not to kind of discriminate for what's affordable and not affordable. More also just to encourage collaboration. All the units, according to the drawings we've provided, all got natural light. So there's no units really, from my point of view, that's worse than others. I don't think a lot of our tenants consider 10 meters further away from the lift is like a negative thing. If anything, they'll probably consider it as positive. For the original planning consent, I probably won't go into much detail, but I don't think originally they never wanted to submit the planning application, but had to due to Bernard Works and the JR. So I think a planning application was submitted, and back then I wasn't involved, but I was aware that they actually wanted to build commercial, but it wasn't what was put forward at the time.
Thanks. Do we have any other questions from the committee? No? Okay. Any further questions, clarifications to any of the parties? Councillor Corley-Harrison.
Two officers. Could you just confirm the new legislation around permitted development on adding additional stories and how that's regulated on new developments?
Yes, that's quite a narrow allowance. So I think it only relates to buildings of a certain period, not recent ones and not sort of pre-war ones. So it wouldn't apply in this case.
So if there are no further comments or questions, the resolution recommendation is to grant with the conditions as laid out. Have you got them there, Mr. Manoka?
Yes, I think we have amended the head of term 4 just to exclude visitor permits. There was mention of parking spaces for commercial, and I think additional wording on the number of STEM courses that should be included, which I think we would probably recommend at 2, which would be convention, where we have included that number. And yes, if members wish, we can include something specific about affordable housing on site.
Do you have any proposal on that?
No, it was on something else.
What would be necessary if there is a concern from the committee that it may be converted to residential at some point in the future? Then we need something firmer by condition around that. Do you have a suggestion to that?
I think the provision of a on-site affordable again is a strong incentive against that. I think we probably have included as much wording as we can to safeguard the conversion. So yeah, but if there's further wording you'd like to include on a particular point.
Okay, Councillor Corley-Harrison.
I don't really know what the suggestion is, but if it's an off-site contribution, should further units be sold off? How's that calculated, and does that roll with every single unit that's sold off, or when we hit a particular threshold? Presumably it'd be every unit onwards, because they would hit 10 from the next unit being sold. I don't know what the calculation would be though.
Yeah, well, I think how we would do it would be to take the residual land value of the 2 schemes, so as proposed, and then as amended if a residential proposal came forward, and then calculate the affordable on the difference of those 2 units. So we could say based on residual land value to include that, and make it explicit that it's all sales in perpetuity, so that it can't be chipped away at or done once and only valued on that and then falls away. So we could ensure that there's some additional safeguarding for that.
And then there was a further point you had.
Yeah, just on that one still though, whether there's anything where a minimum period of it being offered to the market as a commercial unit is in place or could be in place, rather than as soon as it's developed, it suddenly finds itself being converted because, you know, it could be kitted out, converted, and then offered up really. It's similar to how we've said first refusal should go to Haringey or UK residents on some residential properties rather than straight overseas, if you know what I mean.
I think we would need the applicant's agreement for that. It's difficult because we can't refuse to entertain any future planning proposals. So you know, should that come forward, we can't prevent the applicant ever applying for anything or seeking that. So yeah, I think if there was something that they were willing to put in place, that couldn't happen. They still have the option to then bury that in future, and we would need grounds to refuse that. So I think in this case, if we could and the policy allowed us, we would have said absolutely never do this, but we can't actually. We always have to entertain a proposal in the future.
Was there a further point, Councillor Corley-Harrison?
Well, it's just personally for me, I don't think it's particularly tight around the 10% and the continuation of that were things to be sold off. I know that this is, if it were to happen, I mean, it does say as committed to providing 10% affordable workspace, minimum 75% of market rate in perpetuity, as in if it was in its current state, but I'm still not guaranteed that if they were to sell off a bit, how the 10% would work. Would it be a rolling commercial floor space arrangement? But this is getting into the technical details, I suppose. Is now the time to agree? I guess so, if we're deciding on the application.
I think probably the best thing to do would be that it has to be 10% of that total figure, so that it remains 10% of the big number, and even as it chips away, should that happen. So yeah, I'll come up with some wording.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Chair. Under the conditions on page 48, we've taken, and I know the applicant has said that they hope to have it built, assuming permission is given, they hope to have it built within, say, 18 months to 2 years. Wonder if we could reduce that 3 year to 2 years on the first condition. We have done that on lots of other applications.
Is that a condition you'd be willing to accept?
I mean, it's a slightly difficult market at the moment, so I guess that's slightly risky to do with everything going on. Purely, I mean, building materials are going up 30%. Who knows what the banks are going to do if there's going to be another lockdown? So I think there's certain elements within that need to be considered as well. I mean, most planning application will always have 3 years. The intention is for sure to build as soon as they can, but obviously with COVID and everything going around, even though everything is better now, we don't know what's going to happen in the end of the year or next year. So I think that's the slightly tricky part.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, okay, I accept that point. I'd forgotten that building materials are skyrocketing at the moment. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ross. So has that given you a chance to have some? So can you outline the entire resolution on the table?
Yes, I think for head of term 1, I would add the wording no less than 350 square metres of affordable workspace, which is in brackets as 10%. So we do actually have the number there. So I think that would just add that extra clarity. For head of term 9, I would add provision of on-site affordable or a financial contribution towards off-site provision of affordable housing if any of the commercial space is converted to residential use at any point in the future, added in there. And then we have, jumping back, sorry, to head of term 8, just provision of 2 STEM sessions there, and as I said earlier, head of term 4 to exclude visitor permits. I think those were all the recommendations, unless members wish to. Yes, to not exclude visitor permits. Yep, and then yes, if it was acceptable to provide an allowance for commercial spaces, I don't know if that was necessarily taken forward. So we could also amend that if members wished.
No, I don't think nobody's proposed that.
Yes, the transportation officer didn't recommend that you would include provision for commercial parking. That his recommendation was that we should exclude that. So I wouldn't be including that in the amendments.
Okay. Thanks. So that is the resolution before us, committee. So I'd like, with those conditions as outlined by Mr. McKnockers, to vote on the proposal to grant planning permission on those terms. So all those in favour, if they could show now. And all those against? And all those abstaining? Thank you. So what do we have, Miss Ray? Permission is granted. Thank you. So thanks for the applicants and the objectors for coming this evening. Can I have an indication if people want a quick break before the next item? Or are we good to go? Would you like a quick break before the next item, or are we good to continue on? We're good to continue. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So move on to item 9, HGY 2021-2075, land at the junction of Partridge Way and Trinity Road, pages 121 to 2474. We have planning officers Robin Manotta and Richard Truscott, and the applicant team of Martin Cowie, London Borough Haringey Housing Planning Advisor, Aishan Stewart Dowding and Christian Pinchin, and we have some officers joining virtually. There was a comment in the previous item that there were only 2 objectors to speak. According to our planning protocol, there should only be 1 on this hearing again, but with the chair's discretion, if there are 3 that wish to speak, then that's fine by me. So just before we start, can I confirm that they will be Jack Grant, Indigo Ayling and Paul Burnham? Is that right? Yeah, so I think if you can probably at some point seat yourselves over here, that'd be great. Thanks. And we have Councillor Gordon is going to speak in favour as well. Okay, so I think over...
Chair, can I have a point of order?
You may.
Thank you. My recollection is that last time we met, we agreed this proposal on the Partridge Way. And I also recall that I proposed during the course of the discussions that the matter should not proceed to a vote, but wait until the complete consultation had taken place and reported back. And that was voted against by the committee. And so I lost that proposal. But now we got the same thing back again. What's going on?
A very good point, Councillor Rice. I think that will be addressed in the presentation we're about to get.
Before we get to the presentation, I want to know what's it doing here, because it's come through this committee, it's been agreed, the proposal come to this committee, the committee agreed it, and now it's back again like a yo-yo. What is it doing here?
Your question will be answered. You can't hear what we're saying. I'm sorry about that. We will be able to hear. I'm sorry you can't hear. We do have a sound engineer with us, who I'm sure can do something to help with that. Is that any better? Okay, we'll do our best. But thanks. We'll do our best, but it feeds back if it gets too loud.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to give the background on this, as Councillor Rice has questioned, there was a resolution to grant at the 14th of September committee. As was advised then, the consultation was still running due to the late publication of a press notice, which ran until the 24th of September. Further objections have been received, and in this instance, we've taken a cautious approach. they were issues that were broadly considered but not specifically considered, so we brought it back to allow you to consider those points. As the committee makeup is the same as the 14th of September, we're just going to consider the additional issues, and that's what I'll just be presenting to you. So the points that were raised that were material were the disabled access and usability of the building, questions around the space within the flats and the surroundings of the buildings, concern about distances to travel and flat layouts, question around the accessible flats being on one floor and the number of doors within the building. There was also a question about fire risk and accessibility of disabled users, and the fact that there's one door between them and the common area and they would need to wait for an evacuation lift. Just to discuss those points, the accessibility and layout were broadly considered. However, the design will have to comply with part M43 of the building regulations, which is for accessibility for disabled occupants. It meets and exceeds the space standards for wheelchair homes, and although there are 2 flats on the first floor, the Haringey Occupational Health team have looked at that and said it's acceptable. There's 2 disabled parking bays outside the development with level access all the way to the door. These plans just show some of that in detail. So in blue are wheelchair turning areas, mobility scooter parking and power assisted doors. So those don't require a push to open. Then this is the first floor with the wheelchair accessible flats, again just showing some of the detail of accessibility there with power assisted doors, turning circles and clear zones to allow access around those flats. And this is the landscape just showing access from the disabled parking units to the front door by a level public realm all the way around the building. And just in terms of fire safety, the detail on that is that there's a stay put or defend in place strategy. The number of doors are compliant with the required fire safety measures. There was a fire statement and strategy with the application originally as presented, which at the time of the 14th of September committee was reviewed by the Council's building control officers and the London Fire Brigade, and they were satisfied with the development at that stage. All other material points that were raised have been considered in the previous report.
Yeah, so Councillor Rice and then...
I've got a tremendous problem with this, because what's happened here, these proposals have already been agreed by this committee. There is no proposal before this committee tonight to set aside the agreement that took place in the September meeting. So could perhaps we can hear from the legal advisor that what we're doing here is quite right and proper, because it seems to me you have to set aside the decision already made in order to consider the matter a second time and vote on it a second time when the committee has already agreed it.
Councillor, as was explained at the last time this application was considered, the legal advice was that if during the consultation period that was still running there were considerations that the committee needed to have regard to in their decision, it needed to be brought back. And that is the reason why we're here this evening, to ensure that when this decision is taken, and it is being taken again, all relevant information has been had regard to by the committee. And the only way that that can be done is for us to be here this evening.
We must be able to set aside the decision already been made, because we cannot do what you are suggesting with the greatest respect. We cannot have a decision agreed by the committee in a formal and proper way, and then the next meeting, oh, forget about that. We hear some more information coming, oh, forget about that. We do it again. You can't do that. We can't do any stretch of the imagination.
Councillor, the actual decision that has not been given effect to until the planning permission is granted. There's no reason why you can't now take a decision with all of the information, the additional information this evening.
Decision has already been taken.
Okay, we can't have forwards and backwards.
You can't have this. I mean, it may be possible to set aside the original decision and have the whole thing reconsidered. I can understand that. But you cannot, in the face of the decision properly taken, decide you make another decision about the same thing which you already made a decision about. That is not possible. I'm sorry, it's completely wrong.
Chair, Councillor Rice, it can't be the same decision because you didn't have the additional information before you this evening. It's a separate decision based on the information, all of the information, including the information that's now being put to you that wasn't there the first time. So it isn't the same decision because you didn't have all the information.
Information you talked about, I was a member of the committee who said we shouldn't do what you suggested we did, and now it's coming back to bite you. I suggested that all the information was in hand, and we can consider the thing in the full and make a decision. The committee was against me on that, and from the advice on the top table. Now you'll come back and say, "Oh, forget about that. We'll do it again." You can't do that. You have to find a way of setting aside, if it's possible, to set aside the decision that we made on the last occasion, because you can't have two decisions. So which planning permission will you proceed with then? Because you haven't decided against the previous decision. You haven't. It's still alive because it's been granted by the committee in a proper way.
There is no planning permission been granted as yet, Councillor Rice. Until a formal notice is granted by the planning department, there is no plan permission. You've recommended that it be granted and to take into consideration the consultation.
A decision was taken to grant planning permission.
Councillor Rice, we're going round and round the houses on this. I think we have to take what's before us tonight with this new information, because that has been the advice to the committee, and I don't think we're in a position to be able to argue with legal advice at this committee now.
But the decision has already been taken.
We're asked to take another decision, bearing in mind. That's what we're being asked to do.
You can't take another decision. It's already been taken.
So, Councillor Ross, did you have a question as well?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I do take Councillor Rice's point that we did get a chance to defer last time round, and perhaps that would have been the right decision then.
40/40 hindsight is a marvellous
thing. Yes, I know. And also I accept that permission is not granted until there's a legal document signed. So I'm happy to carry on and ask my question. Page 24, page 124, we were talking about fire safety, and right at the top of the page there, it talks about stay put. I thought the fire brigade had changed that very recently as being a policy that they would not follow. I know that's a technical question and we need a fire officer here probably, but I wonder if someone can answer that. And I do have another question afterwards.
Yes, I think that the fine detail of that is probably best put to the applicant team on how that's managed. But I think there was some questioning of that following Grenfell, but I think in certain circumstances that is still permitted, provided you have the right mitigations in place.
You had another question, Councillor.
I do have another one, and that was on page 200. Talks about at the top of the page there, it says a parking survey was conducted in June 2020. That was the height of the first lockdown and no one was using any cars. I wonder if that could either be repeated or how that would affect, because I mean these are, I can't remember the number of the garages that have been knocked down. But would that be affected? Because it go on page 239 to talk about percentages of parking in the area, but it was, you know, people weren't using their cars at the time.
I think I'll ask Mr. Richards to come in on that, but presumably the cars would be more parked if they weren't being used. I don't know. Here we go.
That's correct, Chair. So June during the lockdown will present the worst case scenario in terms of the maximum demand for car parking. as the councillor rightly pointed out, more people would be home and more cars would park on the network. So that would represent the worst case scenario. So that's acceptable.
Thanks. Did you have any other questions, Councillor Ross?
Only my previous question about, you said the applicants were going to.
Should we ask the applicants to answer that question now? That might be easiest, please, about the stay put policy.
Yes, so just to respond to that point directly. Sorry, Christian Pinchin from Pinchin Architects. Yeah, the fire department have slightly changed the description of stay input to defend in place, because there's connotations with stay input that don't read so well. But it is an effective strategy if the correct sort of insulation and fireproofing is put in place. So yeah, it is still the current kind of legislation to do that. And that's been supported by Homes for Haringey and building control at Haringey as well.
Thanks. Is that yeah? Any more questions, Councillor Corley Harrison?
Yeah, I don't want to rehash Councillor Rice, but I'm still a little bit confused about the validity of the original decision that we made, the previous decision that we made. Presumably, were we to make a decision tonight that was counter to the previous decision, the planning department could take either decision forward and issue a notice on the grounds of either decision, because we have made both decisions. Second point is that I think in the presentation you suggested that for tonight we're considering the new information that was presented before us. So are we now acting as a continuation of the previous hearing? In which case, why do we have new objections and I think a supporting comment? Or are we doing the whole application again, in which case we're not getting the whole presentation? I think probably it's the same attendees, but perhaps if you could clarify on that. And I suppose my final point is, why did we all waste our time sitting through this last time? Why didn't we wait and have it at this meeting? We didn't understand it at the time. I don't understand it now. I'm sure no one else does. And I would really hope that this never happens again, because it was shocking at the time that we were hearing an application that hadn't had its consultation completed. And this is evidence of, how badly that turned out, even if the original reason was because of a late issuing of a notice. These applications are determined by us when they come to committee as a council, not by anyone else.
Good point.
I'll just quickly clarify that then, and apologies for the confusion. If you go to page 126 of the agenda pack, that sets out what the recommendation was at paragraph 2.1 of the previous planning committee. So that provided a resolution to grant permission for the head of development management, myself, to issue that with this signing of agreement, provided that there were no new material representations. So in effect, that has happened. So that delegation I was given by that recommendation and resolution falls away, and we're here again. So to ensure that any decision we make is legally sound now, we have to ensure that it's the same committee makeup, so that members have considered it as you would have. So effectively, this is a continuation of that. You should bear in mind the things you've heard before, and the report that was previously presented, and then the additional information that you've heard today.
Does that make it clear, Councillor Corley Harrison?
No, it makes it clear. It doesn't really answer my question, but so Councillor Ibrahim wasn't in attendance for the last vote.
She's abstained on this one anyway. Yeah.
So my original point is, if we make a decision now that's counter to the previous decision, we've issued two decisions. No. Legally, you would be able to take either forward, would you?
No, so I think I can come in here. This is in effect an extension, because if you read that the paragraph as laid out at 2.1, that allows for this to occur. So this is an extension of that meeting in effect.
Right, but I mean, we could do this with any we could hear any application as soon as it was issued, and then say if there's any objections.
I'm going to just so we're not wasting time going round and round every time.
No, sure.
At
I just
at 2.1 in the pack, page 126. This is slightly different recommendation because there is in that the difference is there that unless something else comes up. And that's what's occurred.
Okay, let me just change my question. What's different about this application, which means we've gone through this process, to any other application? Why did we hear it early?
Why did we hear it is a question, yes. I think, for Mr. McKnocker and not myself. Yeah.
Yes. In this instance, all other notifications had taken place, so there was just a press notice left. So, were it to be letters or site notices, which are the main ways that people find out about planning applications, this wouldn't have happened. But in this case, those had already occurred, and there was a technical point that it needed to go in the newspaper, and to give extra time, so that the whole consultation opens up again. But really, it was for anyone to find it via the newspaper who hadn't heard about it through a letter or site notice. So yeah, there was a judgment that the chances of that were reasonably minimal, and that residents that had been sent a letter and read the site notice had raised all the points that they would have done. In this instance, there were some additional points which went beyond the previous material consideration. So to avoid a risk of the planning permission being challenged, we're back to reconsider it to make sure it's absolutely legally sound.
Councillor Rice, would you like to come in?
Just pick up on the point I just made. The officer just said that it's been done to avoid the risk of the planning permission being challenged. It would be better challenged than what we presume to do now. It would be better off being legally challenged than what we're assuming to do now, because what we're doing now is quite frankly off the wall. And I continue to say so. And we had Councillor Ibrahim, who's disappeared. I'm not sure why she's been allowed to leave the meeting, but that was started. And she was also at the last meeting and voted accordingly. And therefore, I mean, I cannot see the decision that we're talking about appears on page 126 of the papers for tonight's meeting, and it simply says this: the committee resolved to grant planning permission, and the head of the development management is authorized to issue the planning permission and impose conditions. Right? That's the clearest bell you can expect to hear. Commission to granted planning permission has happened. You can't overturn that. The words are not fudging, it's simple words and clear. The committee resolved to grant planning permission. Except somebody from the top tier will tell me that we can set that permission aside and can consider the whole thing again. I'm prepared to listen to that, because that makes more sense than what we're proposing to do.
Can I just say, Councillor Rice, on the comment you made about Councillor Ibrahim, she was abstaining on the last because of her involvement in this application through cabinet role, previous cabinet role. So she was not going to be involved in. She wasn't involved in that vote or this one, and wasn't feeling well, so didn't stay for it. But I'll let our legal representative come back on your other point.
Councillor Rice, if I could just clarify for you in recommendation 2.2 that there is reference to an agreement being finalised before plan permission is granted. So though you recommended for something to be granted, but there were requirements that need to be satisfied before that could occur. So there was no grant of planning permission because that was subject to...
So. Why do you keep saying that? It says so.
Because Councillor Rice, I'm directing you to a legal agreement that needed to be completed before the formal document could be granted. You did resolve that it should be subject to something else happening. No planning permission was granted. You are able to reconsider your recommendation. It's a recommendation. The actual decision is when that piece of paper is granted in the council's name.
There's a long
and that's
time.
what we are here this evening is for you to consider this additional information, having already considered the application as a whole before. If you have questions about the application from previous, then obviously they can be answered, but you have the minutes, you have all the information you had before, and to ensure good administration of this meeting, the officers are just presenting the additional information for the members to consider. But they can ask questions about the application as a whole if they wished. If the information that's in the report, the previous report, in the minutes, they do not feel is adequate for them to take the decision this evening.
If I may reply, Chair, every planning application over the last summer, all the staff at Tottenham Hill, those decisions were made subject to a Section 106. It's routine, more or less, nowadays for that to follow the decision. Agree, subject to 106, been agreed, blah, blah, blah. You seem to be saying that all that can just overturn like that if we're not being able to get a Section 106 done. But this is only a few weeks ago, which we agreed this. Nothing has changed. And what's more, this committee attention was brought to the matters that now supposed to be new. I propose in this committee that we did not go ahead in considering the application because we should wait till the consultation was full and complete. It was my proposal, but the committee voted against that, right? And now they seem to be saying, oh yeah, we can overturn that. You overturn what you voted against. You can't do that.
Councillor Rice, you were probably right, but the point is we are where we are, and this is we're going to consider this tonight. And Mr. McKnocker wanted to come back in.
Just one more chance to explain it. That would, as a sort of parallel analogy, should you have granted a resolution to grant, and while the 106 was pending, a planning policy changed, as an example, and materially changed the position on the application, we would have to bring that back. It hasn't happened. We've had things like the New London Plan come in, and generally they don't completely change the policy dial. But if that happened, that would be an example of where new material evidence came forward, and we would have to bring that back to committee to consider. Say you'd granted a commercial scheme on something that was then contrary to policy, you would then need to take that back. So there is precedent for this sort of circumstance where something material occurs. The resolution that had stood no longer stands, and you have to reconsider.
Thanks. Do we have any more questions on the report as presented from any members of the committee? No? If not, then I think we should go on to our objectors who are here. I don't know who would like to go first. Thanks. If you'd like to introduce yourself, and then I don't know if you're here early. It's three minutes each, please, and you'll hear a bell.
Okay.
Thanks.
So my name's Indigo Ailing, and the residents would have 8 doors or barriers to access a day-to-day life in this proposal. A door to access a mobility scooter, to access their post, to access their bins, and that is before they'd hit the lift up and get the door into their home. It said in the report that some of these doors are power assisted, but it does not say which ones. If any of these doors were to break down, you would not be able to access your bins, you would not be able to access your mobility scooter, you might not be able to leave your home. And this is just the bare minimum of, we're not talking about the bare minimum of accessibility. I'm saying that these homes should be built to be, these aren't being built to be sold, they are built for those on the council home waiting list, but what percentage of that group are disabled and who will develop health conditions over the next decade? This is why the council home housing team putting forward homes that barely meet the minimum of 10% wheelchair user dwellings is frustrating. The issue with the fires, you say that there are mitigations in place and there are effective strategies, but if a disabled person was to have a fire in their own flat, they would have to go into the corridor and there wouldn't be a door between where they were supposed to wait in place and where the fire might be happening. And that I don't think has been really considered. You say that the occupational therapist team has been consulted on this, but there hasn't been an access audit. There was no mention of disabled people's consultations at all in the stakeholder report, and yet it just seems like there are so many barriers to be able to actually have a livable home that disabled people can really exist in, and that this hasn't been considered.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
Just to follow up on one point that Indigo raised, why it matters so much about what happens for disabled people when the fire is in their own home is that is a much more likely occurrence. For someone who's disabled, you're more likely to have a fire in your home and have a fire in your home that becomes unmanageable for you. So the fires that happen in this block of flats are most likely to occur in the accessible homes or homes occupied by disabled people. And the last time that I was here, I talked about how there was a lack of consultation on this development. I think, you know, what's happened since has proven that, but I think it's also about the consultation with the people who will live in these homes. You know, Councillor Gordon spoke about how many people on the list have disabilities, and that there were 600 people on the highest priority of the disability list. But in this development, only 10% of those homes are wheelchair user homes. Why is that? When these aren't homes to be sold, they're not for profit, they're for a group of people, and that group of people is more likely to be disabled and much more likely to develop disabilities in the future. And I think that's just something that's broad across the whole programme. There's, you know, they say their occupational health, our occupational therapy team said it was fine, but you know, what experience do they have? But also, where's the report? There's a report for wind, for the trees, for everything. But when you're talking about disabled people's access, that's just something that's sort of, well, we asked someone and they said it was fine. So there's just a lack of care and consideration and consultation on this project. That, again, this is something that is a council-run project, and it's something that will be the beginning of a very large development, very large projects of developing housing across the borough. So it's something that should be got right, because it's something that's going to be replicated. Thank you.
Thanks. Paul, do you want to go next? Well, you have to.
Yes, there's already been a discussion about the status of this evening's meeting. I'd just like to point out that the meeting on the 14th of September did not comply with the law in the form of the Development Management Procedure Order 2015 Part 4, which says that the local planning authority must, in determining the application, take into account any representations received from any consultee. That could not be the case on the 14th of September, as we know, and we wrote to the Secretary of State, the Secretary of State wrote to the Council, and now it's come back to this committee. So I'd just like to emphasise that the decision this evening has to be based on all of the evidence on the whole proposal. It's not about the pathetic 4-page apology for a report that's been put in front of you. And so our concerns, as well as our concerns I would speak about would be, and I live in one of the tower blocks on the estate, is about the lack of amenity in these new homes and the loss of amenity for existing residents, in particular about overlooking into people's homes and about loss of sunlight and loss of daylight. So just first of all, on the overlooking, in the design and access statement, page 14, contains a statement about how it's all been considered and that the design has been improved so that really overlooking is not something to worry about at all. But when we actually look at the proposed new building that faces onto Finsbury House and Newbury House, that frontage contains windows to 17 bedrooms, 8 lounges and 15 balconies, all facing north. So that means they'll be overlooking both ways. This is disastrous. For this to come forward is disastrous. If were it to be accepted, it would be wrong, and we will continue to oppose this. Equally, on the denial of light, we've heard some of it on the previous application. I'll give you some figures now. These are about windows. In the play cabin on the estate would lose 38% of its winter sunlight hours. A window on the 5th floor in Finsbury House would lose 30% of its winter sunlight hours. Newbury House, a 2nd floor flat window, would lose 54% of its winter sunlight hours. This is a really, really bad development. It's badly designed. We need to ask the applicant to take this away and come back with a new proposal for what they can do to improve this site and to quite possibly build some housing on it. But to build a tower block that's immediately to the south and very close to 3 other buildings is completely inappropriate. There is a lack of respect for residents here, and as I say, I suggest that you turn it down and ask the applicant to reconsider. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Committee, do we have any questions for any of the objectors? In which case, we'll go on to the applicants. You have actually 9 minutes, but you don't have to use. Oh no, hang on a minute. I think we hear from Councillor Gordon first, and then the applicant. Beg your pardon. So you have 3 minutes, Councillor.
Is that on? Oh, yes, I can hear myself. Thank you, Chair. Well, I think I wanted to come and speak to this committee because I want to actually come and defend council housing. So I don't know if Mr. Burnham might offer me some honorary membership of his organisation, but you know, the committee quite rightly are always pushing applicants on the question of affordability. What we've got in this scheme is something that is 100% affordable and genuinely affordable. It's 100% council homes. And those council homes are going to be granted in the first instance to nearby residents. We will be able to take people off the council waiting list or let these council flats to people in the vicinity that are either overoccupied or overcrowded, and you know that we are in desperate need of council housing in this borough, and the council have embarked on an amazing council house building campaign, really, and it's more than a campaign. We are now building out these council homes and providing much needed accommodation for our residents, and we're not just throwing up blocks of flats willy-nilly, but they've been built to an extremely high standard. And when we've got COP26 just opening, I would cite that on this particular site that we have got elements of this particular building that is very, very green in terms of increasing the green space, increasing play space, we put in 24 new trees on there. So we're not just building council homes for local residents. We're not just building
Hang on a minute. thanks for coming tonight. But if you shout over any speakers, then those people who are watching the meeting at home just won't hear anything. Thanks. If you want to continue now, Councillor Gordon.
Thank you. So I do think that it's a high quality building that we are putting up. There's high performance in terms of energy saving and it's an impressive operating carbon performance. So I would ask that the committee once again supports council housing in this borough and would accept the recommendation to grant permission. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Already got permission.
Thank you. And now we'll ask the applicant team. Thanks.
Hello, good evening again. Christian Pinchin from Pinchin Architects. Just to respond to some of the objections first, there is a balance to be made between the number of doors from a security perspective, as well as, you know, inhibiting access to disabled people. So there's a number of factors that we have to balance in order to make sure that the building is safe, secure and fireproof. So this has been designed very much with that balance of issues in mind. It's certainly not a building that's been designed to inhibit disabled users, far from it in fact. And we've used something called the SELP guidance to help us actually develop these wheelchair units. So that's the South East London Housing Partnership guidance, which exceeds building control. So for example, Haringey's ERs would want a disabled unit to be 76 square metres. Our largest unit is 96 square metres. These are not just borderline okay, they're much better than normal standard wheelchair flats. They have adequate wheelchair turning circles, they have adequate distance on the leading edge of all doors. You know, they have sections of the kitchens that lower specifically to, you know, adapt to specific users. So, you know, it's just not true that we haven't considered all of those things in the round and really made these as good as they can be with the available space that we have, and they really do exceed standards. In terms of the fire issues in relation to the wheelchair unit specifically, I think the number one point is that we are going to have sprinklers in the whole building. So in the event of a fire, regardless of whether that's in one of the wheelchair units or one of the other units, you know, there is this kind of defend in place strategy, but fundamentally the systems are triggered and sprinklers will go off and will suppress fires. So we're very much not designing a scenario where, you know, any user, especially wheelchair users, are, you know, in any risk. We're designing to the latest standards and we're fully consulting all of that with building control, you know, and the fire department. So, yeah, and Homes for Haringey. So we have been in touch with occupational therapy. So there's a number of organisations that we are consulting with and liaising with in order to balance these issues and really make these, you know, very, very good quality homes in terms of disabled standards and safety. In terms of some of the other points to do with lack of amenity, you know, again, this is a scheme that, you know, does comply in terms of the London Plan standards in relation to external amenity for this scheme. And we are also contributing significantly to the upgrade of other landscape spaces around the scheme. So again, this isn't a bare minimum, we're only providing what's absolutely necessary. This is something where we are actually trying to give back a wider benefit. In terms of sunlight and daylight loss, as we said before in the previous meeting, there are some windows that are affected. We can't deny that. This is an urban development and it has some impact. But, you know, the results of the Rights of Light study are, you know, very, very clear. And they support this scheme in all respects. It's not even a borderline case for them where, you know, they need to use mitigating circumstances, you know, much in order to defend it. or other strategies to defend it, it complies in relation to average daylight factors, direct sunlight, you know, and diffuse visible sky component. The detail of that is really difficult to get across, you know, but we have tried to kind of summarise that, so I can go into further detail on certain elements of it, but it's quite complex in order to provide a comprehensive argument for all of those elements. In relation to overlooking, you know, there is a close proximity with some of the tower block buildings, but we've specifically designed it so that the balconies are on the outer edges of the scheme, and in fact the rear elevation of the scheme, which is the primary elevation that the existing tower blocks will look at, generally has kitchens, bathrooms, and, to be fair, some bedrooms. So we're doing whatever we can in order to limit the amount of habitable rooms that face each other. So we're really trying to work with that to create the best situation that we can. You know, and as Councillor Gordon's already said, you know, on balance, we are just trying to deliver 23, you know, council rent schemes, you know, of the highest quality that we can, given the parameters. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any?
What about the council car park near the civic centre?
Any questions from the committee to the applicant team? No?
Sorry?
No questions? Any questions from the committee for the applicant team?
No, but I got a motion I want to put when you're ready.
If there's no more questions, then yeah, go ahead.
My motion is, Chair, that this proposal is not put to the vote.
Is there a reason for that? Does anyone second that motion? So that motion falls. So the resolution we have is the recommendation is to grant with. Would you want to sum up the conditions and the...
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report presented tonight brings together the conditions as in the original report, the addendum, and then those changed through the minutes. So that is what we're recommending this evening.
Okay. So can I see all those in favour of the recommendation? Can they show now, please? And all those against? And those abstaining? Thank you. So the motion is carried. Thank you. So thank you, the applicant team and two objectors for coming and speaking to us this evening, and to Councillor Gordon. Item 10, an update on major proposals. So it's for noting any questions on those would be to Mr. McKnocker. Give you a few. Yes, Councillor Corley Harrison.
So 139 to 143 Crouch Hill. Just wondering if there have been any updates since the January pre-app.
No, there haven't. We haven't heard from that scheme since then.
Thanks. If there's no other questions, are there any questions on applications determined under delegated powers? Delegated powers. No. We have no new items of urgent business. And the date of the next meeting is next Monday, the 8th of November. We'll see you all again. So thanks a lot. Good night.